Jax is manipulative, insensitive, and sadistic, but the truth is that behind every cruel joke, we find a rather tragic reality. And after learning what he did to his friends, many believe he deserved his tragic end, while others were completely devastated. But do you really know why Jax was like that? What traumas and tragedies did he have to go through to become so ruthless? Since we met Jax, we saw that he has some very interesting qualities. He is completely resigned when it comes to finding a way out, uses others to mock them, is very cynical, and seems to have no empathy for anything. But what nobody understands is that Jax was in the penultimate phase of his abstraction. Because Jax's purpose wasn't simply to be the bully of the group, he understood in the cruelest way that if nothing matters to you, nothing can break you. Jax only uses his cruel humor as a simple way to protect himself, and in fact, it's not just abuse. He has many destructive ways to avoid getting hurt, and it's time to analyze each one. Let's start with that sarcastic and cynical sense of humor that Jax uses to relate to others. When Kaufmo abstracts, everyone is worried except Jax. He even makes pretty hurtful comments, saying things like Kaufmo is better than ever. How's Cosmo? No.
How's Kaufmo?
No, he's great. Actually, I think I've never seen him so happy. In fact, he asked me to give you this.
This kind of comment only reflects the lack of empathy that our purple rabbit wants to show.
They broke my comedy mask.
So, Kane, are we gonna have an adventure for the rookie or what?
He takes advantage of Gangle's suffering to show her that things can get even worse than they already are, and that even so, nothing should matter. And then we have the part where Jax is deliberately cruel. He throws Pomni into the truck just because he thinks it's funny, without considering that Pomni is new, can feel pain, and is still confused about what's going on.
Hey, maybe I didn't leave the door open for nothing.
What? I thought he was dead. Did you leave it open?
Wait a minute, what did you do?
Well, it was a pleasure helping you. See you, bye.
He lets the candy monster in when the adventure had already come to an end. Jax comes back just to let the candy monster in and to reaffirm how gratifying pain and suffering are for him. And when he teams up with Pomni, on many occasions, he manipulates her into crossing dangerous boundaries regardless of Pomni's opinion. But one of Jax's most toxic attitudes is that he doesn't even feel guilty. In several of these scenes, he never apologizes. On the contrary, he uses blackmail as a means of emotional control.
Do it or I'll tell Ragatha about your little drawings.
And every time he makes Gangle cry, he acts as if he's doing her a favor by showing her how cruel the world can be and that she should get used to it. This relates to the following behavior. Constant provocation. Jax loves to create chaos that ends up destroying and destabilizing others. He spends his time contradicting everyone and destroying the little hope they have left. When Jax questions Pomni about whether she really thinks Gangle can be happy, he didn't do it to hurt Gangle even more.
Do you really think Gangle can be happy, Pomni?
What?
I mean, no matter what she does, her comedy mask always breaks. Do you think getting together with Subal magically fixes that?
I thought you didn't care what other people thought.
It's just... No, I don't care, that's true.
With this, Jax just wanted to test how much optimism Pomni had left. And something very interesting is that Jax keeps provoking and attacking Ragatha in a very sadistic way, and I'll explain why later. Lastly, we have that disinterest and indifference that Jax shows towards others' pain. When Pomni arrives at the circus, he doesn't care at all about making her feel comfortable. He takes advantage of the anxious state Pomni is in to make her feel even worse, telling her all the horrible things that await her.
If there were a way to leave, I think we would have left.
And now I ask you, do you really think Jax enjoys doing this? Is he really bad? The short answer is yes. Yes, he is bad, but not because he wanted to be. He simply had no other choice. But then, where did all that evil come from? To find out, we have to analyze Jax's arrival at the digital circus. When he got trapped with the others, Jax wasn't that psychopathic rabbit everyone hates. On the contrary, he was a pretty sensitive character and very easy to make friends with. In fact, he managed to form a strong bond of friendship with Kothmo and Ribbit. And the curious thing is that Ragatha also tried to be his friend. Someone truly bad isn't capable of creating something as special as what Jax had with Cosmo and Ribbit. The friendship with those two was just one part of why she decided she doesn't deserve to be friends with anyone. And he made that decision right when he decided to show Ribbit his most vulnerable side. Jax really had a pretty real conversation with her. He showed her his weak spot, and for our rabbit, showing vulnerability is a big mistake. Here we realize that this isn't the root of the problem. Jax already had that idea before entering the digital circus, which suggests to us that something really horrible must have happened to him to lose hope and trust in humanity. Jax is a pretty deep character because his problems didn't start in the circus. In this place, everything just got more intense, and so he was forced to take the path that would best help him survive, even if it meant hurting others. And when we learn his story, we'll finally understand why Jax chose to become a monster. In our rabbit's human backstory, it was often hinted that someone very close to him constantly made fun of him. In episode 9, we found out that the person who hurt Jax so much was his own mother. We don't know exactly why these taunts happened, but the memory with which Cain tortured him revealed the answer to us. We see Jax very scared on the ground, with a bunch of shadows around him making fun of him. Among these shadows, we can see several of the characters from the digital circus, but we also see how one of these shadows rips part of his clothes off, leaving him completely exposed. But what did this really mean? This scene reflects more than just a simple fear. It's the real problem that Jax is facing, and we have to remember that Gooseworks herself has hinted that the character Jax is trans. Taking this idea into account, everything makes a lot of sense. The mockery within Cain's torment represents his mother's lack of acceptance of his possible gender change, and when the shadows leave him completely exposed, they're practically telling us that Jax is not who he says he is. And Jax is terrified that others will find out because of the way his mother reacted. And maybe you didn't understand why Ribbit put a bow on Jax after their conversation, and our rabbit ended up blushing. Jax confessed everything to Ribbit that night. It was there that he revealed who he really was, and the bow on Jax's head was simply Ribbit's affectionate way of telling him not to worry and that he already knew what he was talking about. But the worst part is that Jax didn't want to wait for Ribbit to make fun of him, so he made the conversation seem insignificant and later said it was just something he made up.
You're talking about, I lied to you, you did know, right?
I got it all from a Wattpad fanfic I read once. Nah, did you believe it?
So, who is Jax really? Jax is a 25-year-old guy named Leroy Mateo. From what we know so far, he grew up living trapped in a body he didn't feel comfortable in. When he decided to open up to his mom and tell her what was happening, she just reacted by making fun of him. How could her son want to become a girl? All these constant taunts about his identity led to a complete rejection of others. Because come on, the person who should support you the most let him down and left him vulnerable. This would be the point where Leroy decides to never trust or share what happens to him again. But tired of not being able to be free, he ended up redirecting his hatred and frustration toward the only person who fueled his anger, his mom. And so, one day, he ended up pushing her so hard that she was left unconscious on the floor, so Jax had to run away as fast as he could. When Leroy arrives at the circus, now as Jax, he was already carrying a lot of unresolved problems. Not knowing who he was, the lack of understanding from others, his struggle with identity, and his distrust of everyone. He probably hoped that everything there could be different when he arrived. He tried to adapt, became friends with Ribbit and Cosmo, and everything seemed to work out wonderfully. But Jax never expected that someone very close would start to take an interest in him more than they should. And that's because Ribbit plays a very important role in the development of a ruthless Jax. Ribbit started to fall in love with Jax, and for our rabbit, this was something he couldn't accept, since he couldn't even figure himself out, accept himself, let alone love himself. So if he didn't love himself, how was he going to be able to love someone else? And it was Ribbit's interest that once again turned Jax's world upside down. He wasn't ready for something that deep. Everything went too far the night he confessed to Ribbit who he really was and the horrible thing he did to his mother. A big mistake, or at least that's the last thing he thought when he was still human before the digital circus. The reaction Jax expected from Ribbit at that moment was for him to make fun of him, just like everyone else did in his human life. He didn't understand that Ribbit was just acting like a great friend, and so he made a decision that would protect him, but would completely change the fate of both of them. Here comes the part where everyone hates Jax. After that conversation, Jax started acting indifferent and distant toward his friend Ribbit just to keep Ribbit from asking him more questions, to avoid saying more about himself. He played cruel jokes on her, started responding sarcastically, and avoided talking about the subject with Ribbit at all costs. This caused a lot of confusion for Ribbit, and Jax noticed that and took advantage of that vulnerability to push Ribbit toward abstraction. The worst part is that Jax was always aware that Ribbit could become abstracted because of how rude and hurtful he was being to her, and yet he still didn't stop. He kept shutting her out everywhere until Ribbit couldn't take so much psychological damage anymore and finally broke down. This was the moment when the good Jax officially died, and he knew it. This is where Jax's philosophy was born. If nothing matters to you, nothing can break you. He realized how important he was to Rivet and how it ended. For this reason, he couldn't allow himself to be friends with anyone. He couldn't love anyone. So, he decided to act as if nothing mattered. He was in a digital world. He didn't even know if they were real or if there was a way out. So, what did it matter to hurt and have fun with everyone if there were no consequences? And this, my friends, is a pretty dangerous way of thinking, because the moment Jax decided to think that way, there were no limits. That's why from then on he decided to take control of others, manipulating them, mocking them, being cruel, and distancing himself more and more from everyone. Until the day of Kaufmo's abstraction arrived, this loss was the final piece for Jax to become the next one. Remember when I said Jax was the only one who didn't seem to care about this? Ribbit was just a defense mechanism. Jax had to ignore it so it wouldn't hurt as much, and so he wouldn't carry that remorse like he did with Rivet. Because remember, if nothing matters, nothing can destroy you. So, Jax started taking it out on everyone. He especially enjoyed seeing Gangle emotionally fragile and breaking her down even more. Because Gangle was his personal reminder of what Jax shouldn't do. That's why he hated her so much. With Ragatha, things were different. She tried many times to get close and talk to Jax, but after what happened with Ribbit, it wouldn't be possible to become friends with her. Ragatha represents everything Jax doesn't want to accept. Because Ragatha cares about others, she tries to keep everyone together and make sure they get along. But that in Jax's mind doesn't exist and shouldn't exist, let alone accept it. Because if Jax accepted it, he would also have to accept suffering and all his emotional problems. He would have to accept that he destroyed Ribbit, Kaufmo, and himself. So, when Pomni arrived at the circus, Jax saw her as a new way to escape his reality, doing exactly the same thing he did with the others. But what Jax didn't expect was that Pomni would be one of the most emotionally resilient characters, and he knew that from the moment Pomni appeared at the circus. He tested her many times during the welcome adventure, but Pomni wasn't as reactive as the other characters. She didn't seem as affected by our rabbit's comments as Ragatha, Gangle, or even Zubul were. The whole relationship we saw between Pomni and Jax was one of the most genuine in the circus. Pomni kept approaching Jax despite his indifference. She insisted and never gave up. Even when they were a couple, Jax realized that he could still have fun and be himself with Pomni. But as we saw with his past relationships, this was too scary for him, so he did exactly the same thing to Pomni that he did to Ribbit. He humiliated her and made her feel like a fool for offering him her friendship. The difference with Ribbit is that Pomni did confront him and also told him the truth. In their argument, Jax was left completely defenseless, and the most real thing he said was,
I'm nothing else. So, just stop searching.
Pomni really hoped she could save him, and it was a shame she arrived too late. Jax had already made his decision the night he talked to Ribbit. It was just a matter of time before he ended up abstracting. All that remorse came back to Jax because of Pomni. She could have been Ribbit. That's why Jax tells her that everything was better before she and Zubul arrived. Jax never wanted to admit that he was also interested in Ribbit. And then, what's worse is that he never told him and never got to apologize. And when everyone starts wondering about the exit and tries to get as much information as they can from Kinger, Jax reacts that way because he's about to lose his only safe place. So, besides carrying all the tragic moments he'd already lived with on his conscience, now he also had to struggle with the idea that they're nothing, and that in fact, nothing really matters. This is pretty contradictory because Jax was always faithful to his philosophy. That's why he was the way he was. But deep down, he did care and he was being hurt. It's at this point that a deeply troubled mind like Jax's found itself in a dead end, which ends up becoming a double prison for him. And now, what was his only way out? Exactly, to abstract. But the worst part is that not even in his mind could he be free, and Pomni came to show him that yes, it's true that nothing mattered or made sense, but all that time trapped could have been used to make everything worthwhile. And with all this, we can now understand the meaning of all the Jaxes we see in his mind. When Pomni enters Jax's head, she doesn't find the real Jax. She finds too many Jaxes, and these aren't different personalities or copies. These are masks he used to pretend that nothing mattered. We find the mocking one, the cruel one, the one who provokes, the one who pretends nothing matters to him. But we also find a chained Jax, which represented the sensitive and vulnerable side that Jax didn't want to show. The piano represents his feelings. He was a prisoner of his own feelings. The female version of Jax only represents that cynical and sarcastic side, making fun of himself. And Jax used so many versions of himself to survive in the circus that he ended up losing himself. That's how we witness the end of a disturbed mind with no support at all. No one knew how to really reach out to Jax when he could still be saved. Pomni arrived, but it was already too late for Jax. Our rabbit wasn't a psychopath like many people think. Otherwise, the story would have been completely different. But tell me, what do you think about Jax? After this, do you think he deserved his ending? Or would you give him a second chance if you could?